Imagine surfing the internet 100 times faster, or downloading an entire movie in seconds. No, it's not science fiction. It's called 5G, the fifth generation for mobile and computing networks. But like every new technology, the race is on. Who will build the next information superhighway? Will it be the Chinese tech company Huawei or a US tech giant? We will hear from reporters, tech companies, about what is really at stake in the race to 5G. Hello, welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. Experts say 5G, short for fifth generation wireless technology, is on the verge of revolutionizing our world. And it may be the key to a smarter, more efficient, more connected world.
"5G, short for fifth generation broadband technology, represents the next big leap in mobile computing, allowing internet transfer speeds up to 100 times faster. While the technology is currently limited to just a handful of test communities, experts predict 5G will be commonplace in less than 5 years. But there are two major drawbacks. 5G cell towers have smaller transmission ranges, and signals don't travel as well through concrete buildings and large structures. You may also need to buy new 5G-capable phones to replace your old ones. In the future, 5G networks will run security cameras, heavy machines, medical monitors, and home appliances, and it could finally make self-driving cars a practical reality, allowing instant, real-time communications to make them safer and more efficient. Which is why, in cities like New York, researchers are busy developing experimental wireless networks like this one in West Harlem, codenamed Cosmos.
The idea is that researchers from industry and from academia can log in remotely and run their experiments on the testbed. So if they have ideas that are not included in 5G or will become relevant in 6G or whatever G, they can test them on the testbeds.
What makes Cosmos unique is its real-life urban setting, transforming this Upper Manhattan neighborhood into a high-tech outdoor lab.
One of the challenges that faces 5G now is that it's being rolled out before we know what all the use cases are. Cosmos gives us an opportunity to start to develop those use cases to further drive the value of 5G and to know that those use cases are going to solve problems for all New Yorkers.
To develop new applications for 5G, the team behind Cosmos have created a curriculum designed for the first beneficiaries of an ultra-fast network, local students and teachers.
So that a high school kid could also come up with an idea for a radio or other type of application that could run within the testbed. So you could literally have IBM and a high school student running on the same platform. That's access and exposure that's never been done before. It's unprecedented.
All of a sudden you have teachers who can understand waveform and signal propagation and are seeing how it helps them be better math teachers and science teachers.
While fully functioning commercial networks are still a few years away, communities like this one are already testing the boundless possibilities of 5G, studying its impact on the global economy, on industry, and on the next generation of innovators.
VOA technology correspondent Tina Trin contributed to our report and joins us from New York. Nice to see you, and I understand the pleasure of being able to download a movie quickly. But tell me, how could this change my life, your life, or anyone else's life?
Well, when we talk about 5G, Greta, we're really talking about speed. And speed pertains to everything that's connected to our cellular networks. And really, when you think about it, that's a lot of stuff. It has the capability to potentially really transform industries that heretofore were kind of considered undisruptible. So when we think about transportation and first responders and emergency personnel and utilities on the smart grid and all the data that they'll capture, this is really about being able to process that data even faster than we do today, 20 times faster, in fact, than what 4G networks, current 4G networks, data speed transfers rates are. And so speed is really of the essence here. But the one caveat will be, how soon can we actually experience this? Because the rollout is happening slowly but surely. It's definitely not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a few years before we can really take advantage of the full potential of 5G. And that's really because the reality is we still have to build out these networks. The network architecture and infrastructure really has to change.
All right, so it's fast. I get that. I love that because sometimes I'm done a lot of time to download a movie. But if it has trouble penetrating cement structures, I think that was the report, or the transmission is a short range, now I feel like I'm back to trying to find where I can get the signal so I can download it fast. I'm going to spend all my time looking for that.
Yeah, so 5G networks will basically require a lot more cell sites and towers to cover the vast areas that we want to cover. And right now, they're limited to cities like Chicago, Minneapolis, LA, Houston. And so they're building them out slowly, and they're going to require 3 to 10 times as much cell sites to cover and really bring 5G to life. And so it'll get there, but it's going to take some time for sure. And what you'll start to see is kind of a combination of 4G and 5G technologies working together. So if you have a phone, it's more than likely going to be able to connect to these hotspots via 4G. And then depending on if you're in the right area, you'll connect to 5G to really take advantage of that.
So I don't have to have a 5G phone to use the 5G. I can use a 4G phone to hook up with a 5G hotspot and then get the advantage of the speed?
Yeah, for now, I would hold off on buying any 5G phones, mainly because the sticker shock will really be big, and we're talking about $1,200, $1,300 for some of these phones that are being rolled out. They're only taking advantage of 5G on a limited scale at this point, so you can kind of like sit back and wait, I would say.
Well, if I think of the rural areas, if they've got to have all these towers, a lot of people don't like the sight of these towers. If you've got to have more towers with the 5G, they may prefer the 4G with the fewer towers if there's a shorter range.
Yeah, and honestly, 4G is still quite capable. I mean, we've reached full 4G standards at this point, and it takes care of a lot of our connectivity needs. But you can, I'm pretty sure you've been in a place where you have maybe 1 bar of service left on your phone, and that can be pretty frustrating, And so
that's 5G, right here. That's right here on this set. I've already been frustrated before the show started.
So 5G promises 20 times faster speed, more connectivity, more reliability. But the big caveat again is how soon can we get there? And that will be a number of years before we really can take full benefit of 5G.
Tina, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greta.
At the center of the 5G controversy is a Chinese telecommunications company, Huawei. And until recently, Huawei was not well known here in the United States, but the Chinese firm is a technology giant in the rest of the world. And Huawei now appears to be leading the race to build the next generation wireless network. Chinese tech giant Huawei is the world's largest supplier of networking equipment. Based in Shenzhen, China, Huawei makes a number of electronic products, from wires and routers to personal computers and smartphones. In 2018, Huawei reportedly topped Apple to become the world's second largest maker of smartphones, second only to Samsung. Its high-end smartphones are readily available across Africa and Asia, but in the United States, Huawei has been virtually locked out of the market, in part because the U.S. government suspects Huawei's products are less secure and could provide a technical backdoor, allowing the Chinese government the ability to gather intelligence from users. The FBI and CIA have warned U.S. consumers not to buy phones built by Huawei, because under Chinese law, the government has the right to demand consumer information collected from Huawei users. The company rejects those claims, saying that as an independently owned company, it has no ties to the Chinese government and insists its products are secure. You may recall that just recently Canada, at the request of the United States, arrested Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, accusing her and her company of stealing American technology. Huawei denies those allegations, but given the company's close ties to the Chinese government, could its equipment and its networks be used to spy on other nations? Joining us to talk about potential security threats is Li Ya, Foreign Affairs Correspondent, VOA's Mandarin Service. Nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Okay, who owns Huawei? It's not the Chinese government, or is it?
No, on the surface, Huawei is a private company founded in 1987. It's owned by its employees, which is more than 180,000 right now.
There is a law, though, which I got from you. I got the translation from you, Article 7, and it says that the organization or an organization, Huawei would be an organization or company, shall provide information should the government ask for it. That means if they spy on somebody or get some information through their equipment, that if the Chinese government asks for it, they shall provide it.
Well, we know Huawei's argument is that, first of all, it's very vague, right? This law, according to the National Intelligence Law, which is passed in 2017 and revised in 2016, it's just vague. The terms is vague, and Huawei is saying no Chinese law is requiring Huawei to install backdoors in its networks. So it did say, as you just mentioned, I think the Article 14 actually is interesting to point out. It says national intelligence agencies may require relevant agencies and organizations and citizens to provide necessary support, assistance, and cooperation. But it's not very specific.
All right. Well, the Article 14 less specifics uses the word may. Article 7 uses the word shall. But and this is what the United States government says, is that there's a risk of doing it. But the United States has something that's actually quite similar called national security letters, in which the U.S. government can issue without getting a judge to sign off on a warrant, and done secretly can make demands like of Google and Microsoft and Apple. So likewise, they have some sort of mechanism.
Well, Huawei's founder Ren Zhengfei recently told reporters in interviews, he said that he's not going to do that. Huawei is not going to do that if the Chinese government demands that. As we mentioned, this is irrelevant to a new law. There's no precedence. So far, we don't have a case.
But of course, naturally, I mean, the U.S. government says there's a risk. They don't trust that that's in fact going to happen. And there's been sort of a backlash even from Huawei, calling the U.S. government a bunch of losers, because that's the term that was used, loser, because that it's really sort of an equipment race for 5G between the United States and China and South Korea a little bit in this race.
Right. They're saying because of this strategic rivalry, because of the U.S. Fear of Huawei, it is now not even minding its table manners. Yeah, but Huawei keeps saying, and its lawyers keep saying that, the laws didn't really say specifically that.
My translation says yes, but tell me this: is Huawei, has it expanded its footprint all over Africa in terms of its infrastructure? And I mean, is the company in Africa, for instance?
In a sense, it is. It's Africa is Huawei's the fastest growing market, especially in terms of smartphone market.
So we can't buy the Huawei phone here in the United States, but the Huawei equipment is sold all over Africa. In fact, it's in how many countries? It's sold all over the world.
According to Huawei, it says it operates in more than 170 countries and regions, serving more than 3 billion people around the world.
So now a Huawei executive has been arrested in Canada.
Correct.
And I imagine that's stirring up an incredible controversy within the company, not within China. What's been the reaction to that?
Well, in China, there's public anger over this arrest. We know the Meng Wanzhou, the person who was arrested by the Canadian authorities, is the daughter of Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei. So, as some people pointed out, it's kind of equivalent to arresting a high-level executive of Apple in China.
And I understand that the reason why she was arrested in Canada, she was changing planes, but this was an American arrest warrant, and Canada is just honoring the American arrest warrant.
Right.
And so the question is whether she'll be extradited here to the United States to answer to, I guess it's technology theft?
The United States has started its extradition process. But right now, Huawei also filed a suit against the Canadian government, saying that Meng Wanzhou's rights were violated during this whole process of arrest. which also mentioned that Huawei has also filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government because based on the latest Authorization Act, it bans Huawei from selling. No, I mean it's basically the law. The Authorization Act says that the U.S. agencies should not buy telecom products from Huawei, and Huawei thinks this is unconstitutional because it's only targeting Huawei, this individual company.
And there's some countries, like the UK is considering buying some of Huawei products. Other countries around the world, countries that we typically, the United States does a lot of business with. So you imagine that someone could buy one in the UK or visit and bring that product here to the United States. We know that European countries, Europe is a huge market for Huawei, and we are now, we know the U.S. government is launching a campaign trying to convince our airlines and friends not to use Huawei's equipment, especially the 5G networks. Because it's the backdoor risk to spying on and getting intelligence. Yeah.
That's the concern, but so far Huawei has, there's no proof to say Huawei has built backdoors in its equipment and is not accused of spying on behalf of the Chinese government.
But there's not a lot of trust going back and forth. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Clearly there are advantages to switching from old cellular networks to 5G, but some warn that the coming leap could leave billions of networked electronic devices vulnerable to security breaches and intelligence gathering operations. That's the warning in a recent congressional report that outlines how China is planning to end America's high-tech dominance. VOA's Greta Van Susteren explains.
The coming 5G networks will bring billions of new devices online, changing the way we work and live. It brings lightning speed to support advanced technologies and promises millions of new jobs. China intends to win the 5G race. The Made in China 2025 plan presented at the 19th Party Congress last year clearly states the end goal is not just to achieve technology leadership, but to eventually govern it.
We also have a very serious competitor who is pressing ahead in this direction in ways that the U.S. is bound to respond to. The issue of 5G technology plays into the larger picture of the U.S.'s national security, American economic security, and also to our stance of alliances around the world.
To date, at least 61 countries have an agreement or have announced testing of gear made by Chinese IT giant Huawei. The growing number of countries opting for Huawei is tied to China's comprehensive bargain deals, say industry leaders.
The Chinese government, to make a long story short, is prepared to subsidize the cost of equipment to an unprecedented degree.
China's advance is raising Washington's concerns about the use of Huawei equipment in countries that host U.S. military bases such as Germany, Italy, and Japan. Huawei is known to have ties to China's military and intelligence agencies.
Our armed services, who will look forward to being able to use 5G networks in Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East, to know that they'll be sharing that information across those 5G networks that are wired by Chinese companies, specifically by Huawei, is not going to make them feel very comfortable.
But veteran policy advisor Karl Rove says China is not infallible.
They got a reputation for shoddy equipment and shoddy deployment. The debt dependency instances in Africa and Asia are causing some people to have doubts about whether or not they want to be further dependent upon the Chinese.
Greta Van Susteren, VOA News, Washington.
Huawei, which now serves 45 of the 50 biggest global phone companies, has signed contracts with 30 carriers to test the new technology and has shipped more than 40,000 5G base stations across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. That's a lot of forward movement by China in the race to 5G. Here to discuss how the United States positions itself in that race is Jonathan Spalter. He is the president and CEO at U.S. Telecom, a trade association that represents the nation's telecommunications industry. And he has more than 20 years of experience in the industry and was a former director at the National Security Council. And full disclosure, he was also former chief information officer and associate director at the United States Information Agency, the agency once tasked with overseeing Voice of America. Nice to see you.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so who's winning this 5G race? Is it China or the United States? And should one country fear the other?
Well, first of all, I think it's consumers that are winning the 5G race, because ultimately the deployment of 5G is going to have life-changing benefits for consumers everywhere here in the United States. I think it's really important, though, to sort of level set. The United States is deploying commercially now 5G. We're doing it in cities across the country. We're expecting a ramp up and a scaling of that technology over the next few years. And if you just look at the analysis of where the United States is versus the rest of the world, we are in fact in a dead heat for moving forward really aggressively. And the two reasons why: one is because we're investing mightily in our networks, not just on the wireless side, but also in the undergirding technologies, which is wired technology. And the second, we've got great policies that are allowing for more flexible, lighter touch regulatory approaches to incentivize that investment.
All right, the U.S. has been critical of Huawei, saying that that it's going to have to cooperate with the Chinese government pursuant to law if the Chinese government wants to go backdoor, get some intelligence gathering that Huawei. And I brought up these national security letters that the U.S. has, in which the FBI can get information from these companies without going to a judge and getting a warrant, for instance. Are these essentially the same complaints about each other?
Well, I think it's really apples and oranges. Look, if you're comparing how the Chinese government commands and controls its telecommunications networks versus what we do here, which is about fierce competition, light touch regulation.
Well, what about getting information? It seems like the honor system. If the Americans don't know what is being obtained because the FBI doesn't have to tell them and can do it without a warrant, I mean, isn't that a lot like the Chinese law?
I think it's a complete night and day comparison.
Really? Why?
Well, because we have judicial processes that are actually embedded in statute. We have very clear approaches here in the United States that make sure that the integrity of privacy of our customers are forefront on our minds. And
correct me if I'm wrong. Does the FBI, when they do this, and we're going on, I guess I'm taking down the weeds, but does the FBI have to get go to a judge to get this information, or can it go straight to a company?
It has to get judicial authorization in order to be able to acquire those types of information. And also, our companies, our broadband providers in the United States, are very vigilant about ensuring that the integrity and the privacy of their customers' data information are intact. I mean, that's the bedrock of how we actually do business in this country.
I'm going to have to research it more, because my research so far says they can do it in secret, but I took us down the weeds. Okay, is the U.S. developing 5G in Africa?
The U.S. is developing 5G in the United States. Our companies, we have four major companies, hundreds of other companies that are on a race to deploy 5G. We have... How
about Africa?
Well, right now our focus is in developing the United States market. There are a lot of components that go into actually being a 5G network. It's not just the hardware of companies like Huawei and ZTE and others provide. It's the coding inputs, it's chips, it's the way that you actually design and develop the technology that's embedded in the actual 5G network itself. Our purpose here is to scale our networks here in the United States rapidly and achievably, so that when all of the innovations and all of the incredible use cases can come online, it will be the United States network that will be the beacon for how all the rest of the company actually thinks about what use cases are possible.
Give me some samples of how it's going to change my life. I like the downloads fast, but I mean, tell me, like, is it going to have something to do with cars, self-driving cars, is it going to in the healthcare industry? Tell me how this is going to change my life.
It really isn't just about your cell phone and incredible speeds, right?
People watching this think like, well, I got 4G, that's pretty fast. Do I need 5G?
In a world where you have not only ubiquitous availability, but sensors that are about 1 million wireless sensors in a square kilometer, we're going to be able to enable the industrial Internet of Things. It'll allow for autonomous vehicles. We'll have robotic surgery. We'll be able to have connected health, distance learning. The use cases are incredible and endless, and we've just begun to...
But is that only speed, or is that, I mean, it's like, and I like speed, but I like the fact that if you're doing robotic surgery, I think if you have to move quickly in robotic surgery, I would like it to be as fast as it possibly can. But is it just speed? And I shouldn't say just as though speed is insignificant, but...
Well, speed is a very critical component of the evolution that we're making towards 5G and beyond 5G. But what's also hugely important is that the instantaneous nature of the networks. The word is called latency, that when I actually send a signal, it's going to be able to be received by a small wireless sensor or human being almost instantaneously in nanoseconds. And when you actually reduce that latency to almost nothing, incredible innovation is possible.
You know, it seems to me it's a little bit like the electric car. Like you have a gasoline engine, you hit the accelerator down, and it's got to go through a lot of gears, and it's a lot slower. If you have an electric car, it's like turning on a fan. You just take off. I mean, so this would just take off. Is that essentially? Is that a good analogy in some ways?
It is a good analogy.
There's no delay.
There's almost no delay. It's literally measured in nanoseconds in a 5G standard, which means that when a car is about to hit potentially something and sees it, it will be able to instantly manipulate the device in order to be able to be safe. And then you can extend that across all kinds of use cases that we're just beginning to imagine. 5G, think of it as a canvas upon which innovators are going to be able to paint all kinds of interesting new applications and services and technologies and use cases.
Get dizzy.
But the good news is for consumers, it's not just all these kinds of new great things that we're going to be able to use, but also it's going to create enormous economic productivity. Recently, we've seen analysis that it's going to create $500 billion in economic productivity, 3 million jobs just in the United States of America.
I hope you're right on that, because every time you hear like like Google getting some, or someone getting some sort of tax advantage in some state because it says it's going to create all these jobs, but then we find out that it doesn't create all these jobs because it's so efficient, doesn't need all these people. So I worry a little bit about technology hurting jobs rather than creating jobs.
Well, we're pretty determined that this is not only going to create jobs, but it's also going to create an enormous amount of productivity. And a lot of that's going to also be based on the fact that our companies, the U.S. telecom companies, are investing tens of billions of dollars annually in providing the wired infrastructure that makes the wireless last mile possible of 5G. And that's very, very important.
Is this going to cost more to the consumer? Probably.
I don't think so. I think that at the end of the day, when we have almost ubiquitous networks that are going to be incredibly dense, enormously scalable, and secure, with an incredible amount of competition to achieve the types of use cases that we want to see, there's going to be scalability, and with scalability there's going to be economies of scale, and with economies of scale there's going to be actually lower prices.
Two questions. One is, how fast do you think before most of the United States has 5G, and how fast, for instance, would you expect most of Africa to have 5G from now?
So we're all looking at the next 5 years where we're going to see fully deployed networks. In the United States, we think by 2023, fully half of our mobile devices are going to be 5G enabled. And we're going to see also, not just again our devices, but our wireless sensors, the Internet of Things, begin to take off and do incredible things.
Other parts of the world, like Africa, can you give a prediction? Maybe you can't give a prediction.
Potentially could be slower. It's hard to know exactly, because a lot of it really depends, as I said before, on the willingness to invest mightily and massively in the underlying network infrastructure, which we're doing here in the United States. And that gives us a competitive advantage.
Well, I love technology, so this will be fun to watch. Anyway, thank you very much.
It's great to be here.
Before we go, I want to tell you about another case of alleged persecution of journalists, this time by the government of the Philippines. Authorities in the Philippines recently issued arrest warrants for Maria Ressa. Now, she's the founder of the Filipino news website Rappler and 6 of its executives. The journalists were charged with violating the country's anti-dummy law, which states that all local media must be 100% Filipino-owned, and the charges stem from accusations by the Filipino government that Rappler received funds from the Omidyar network, which was created by eBay founder and American businessman Pierre Omidyar to promote open societies. Rappler denies that foreign investment in its company conveys ownership, and a representative from the Committee to Protect Journalists stated this about the Philippine government. It is clear that the government is manipulating the law to muzzle and intimidate one of its most credible media critics. According to reports, all of those charged have posted bail, except for Ressa, who was traveling abroad when the arrests were made, and the Filipino court has set an arraignment date, and we here at Plugged In will be watching closely for updates. That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America, and you can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta, and do follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thanks for being plugged in.